So, today I want to talk about bills expanding child labor. Now, over the past few months, several state legislatures in the United States have been attempting to pass bills in order to expand or change the rules around child labor. This, of course, comes after there's been a massive uptick in reports of incidents of child labor violations. In fact, it's gotten so bad that the Biden administration has actually had to urge companies to stop doing child labor on more than one occasion. With that said, however, some of the examples of the child labor law violations that we've seen have included an industrial cleaning company called Packer Sanitation Services, which was caught hiring children as young as 13 years of age at a facility with dangerous chemicals and machinery. We've also seen at least two Hyundai subsidiaries in Alabama who were caught employing children in a facility with heavy machinery that produces car parts. Now, these are the ones that I've covered on this channel, and I'll link the videos to those specific cases in the description down below in case you want to learn more. However, we've reached the point where this is becoming so frequent and these laws are becoming very scary that we actually need to start addressing the wider issue of child labor rather than specific examples. Now, one would have hoped that we learned our lesson from history and that we all collectively could recognize the negative impacts that child labor has on children. As much as it should go without saying, it seems that stating the obvious in these times is completely necessary. Child labor poses significant health risks to children, especially those who may work in factories, construction jobs, or similar trade jobs. In these jobs, they are more likely to get injured than adults, and in places with chemical exposures are more likely to develop long-term illnesses, especially when it comes to things like caustic burns or any sort of disease that could be developed from inhaling chemicals. Working at a young age is likely to increase poverty rates and help continue a cycle of poverty as hours that should be devoted to education are traded for work hours in jobs with few exchangeable skills. Perhaps most importantly, it has negative psychological impacts on children and negatively affects their development and inhibits their social skills due to a lack of time spent with family and with peers. This all is what it does to children. None of this even begins to explore how this negatively affects labor unions and adults who are seeking employment, or the general job market as a whole. Just how it affects children negatively. Child labor is not a good thing, and I can't believe I have to be saying that in these times. That said, none of this seems to matter to these states when financial interests are in play. Both the pandemic and recent surge of union activity has massively changed how people engage with businesses when it comes to their labor. Many workers have pushed back against substandard wages and moved on from low-paying jobs that were barely keeping up with rising food, rent, and medical costs. Now, in response to this, businesses have put out their usual campaigns, whining about how nobody wants to work anymore, as they have always done historically, and they have tried to hire younger and younger workers to fill these roles instead of paying workers a living wage. And now, in order to protect the interest of these businesses, rather than, of course, the needs of workers who need to be able to afford to pay their own bills, we have seen a lot of these states introduce laws or bills, at the very least at this time, to try to roll back child labor protections. Now, some of the examples of states we've seen are Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Ohio, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. Now, while you can take a moment to pause the video here to take a look at the specifics for yourself, I'll also link this in the description down below so you can check it out. These bills introduce some genuinely horrible ideas, like increasing workable hours for children, creating additional sub-minimum wages so that children can be paid less than the minimum wage in certain states, and eliminates parental requirements and verifications for children to work. Naturally, these ideas are sponsored by business associations who stand to make a great deal of profit for their industries by employing cheap child labor. Now, while these are all egregious, I think the law that we need to focus on the most are the ones in Minnesota and Iowa. They are worth explicitly noting, as Minnesota is hoping to make it so that 16-year-olds can actually work hazardous jobs. We can see here it lifts restrictions on hazardous work and extends work hours for children. This includes construction jobs for 16 and 17-year-olds. Meanwhile, Iowa's Senate just passed a bill known as SF 542, which isn't even listed here. That particular bill enables children as young as 14 years of age to work in industrial laundries as well as meatpacking plants in freezers and meat coolers. Further, this bill allows 14-year-olds to load equipment onto motor vehicles and work night shifts, while also allowing 15-year-olds to work on assembly lines. Additionally, it grants new discretion for the state to waive, reduce, or delay civil penalties if an employer violates child labor laws, and providing employer immunity from legal claims arising from the injury, illness, or death of a child while engaging in work-based learning programs. We can actually take a look at the bill itself. And again, not something I'm going to be able to sit here and read through, but you can see them crossing out 15 year. Anything that's crossed out is something they're changing. So they're making it so that things that were previously allowed for 15-year-olds are now 14-year-old permitted work activities. And you can scroll through. Anything underlined here is being added to the bill as well. And you can go through it yourself. Again, I'll link this in the description down below. We are looking at a bill here that, if passed by the House in Iowa, would grant these companies the ability to hire minors and extend the hours that they work in order for them to be working in more dangerous conditions at younger ages for less wages, while lowering the responsibility of employers when injuries do occur. Again, this is children's lives that will be deeply affected for their entire lives in order for some companies to not raise their wages. Now, when we look at all of this, the biggest trouble here and this is something that we should look at whenever we see these types of patterns of bills occurring in several states at the same time, is that we have to ask the question, what exactly or who exactly is advocating for this? Anytime we see similar bills appearing in several states at the same time, it should raise a red flag, and at the very least, raise questions as to where these laws are actually coming from. And it doesn't take much investigation to find out that there is actually a single organization behind several of these laws. In fact, when we look more into it, we find that according to the Washington Post, the Foundation for Government Accountability and its lobbying arm, the Opportunity Solutions Project, are behind pushes for child labor bills introduced by Republicans in Arkansas, Iowa, and Missouri. So the question becomes, what are their motives? And what are they trying to accomplish outside of the obvious profit motives for businesses? Because while that is something they're clearly trying to do, it generally can't be all of it. Well, first, when we look at the bill in Arkansas, we find that the law eliminates the requirements for children under 16 to show documentation of their age before being able to work, thus making it easier for employers to violate child labor laws and illegally employ and exploit immigrant children. Now, the reason for this is that children who have no documentation for their work are harder to trace, meaning that instead of schools being able to keep track of children and where they're working and thus being able to know the types of conditions that the children are working in, as well as maybe being able to assist the child in certain cases where something is happening in their place of employment, these places of business would be essentially unaccounted for and could be allowing the children to work in dangerous conditions with little to no information available to anyone but the child, who of course is unlikely to know labor laws in the first place, especially as many adults are not familiar with labor laws and how they're supposed to work. Now, additionally, a lot of these labor violations have involved young children who have migrated into the United States. And if you have incidents where there's no documentation required of any child under the age of 16 to work at certain locations, then it certainly makes it easier for these employers to exploit these migrant workers, as well as give the companies another layer of plausible deniability when it comes to hiring children under the legal limit, especially when it comes to migrant children. Now, the reason that this is the case is that employers just need to say, I didn't know their age, and it removes a lot of the responsibility. But if there's a piece of paper, a document that makes the business accountable and eliminates any doubt that these children are in fact underage, then they cannot in any way get away with these types of cases and will hopefully be held accountable in the long term. Now, that doesn't always pan out. States don't usually follow up. I've talked about how district attorneys sometimes know about these things and don't actually do anything about them. That happens all the time. But at the very least, there's a level of documentation and accountability in place. Now, when we look further into the FGA's own articles, we can actually find that in January of 2022, the group published a paper entitled How States Can Streamline the Hiring Process for Teenage Workers and Restore Decision Making to Parents. This very same paper also has a source that discusses the ways that social safety nets can be slashed in order to force more children into work, and says that teenagers are, quote, a critical source of labor. Now, when we actually look at the articles themselves, we see that this is no exaggeration. The articles written by Foundation for Government Accountability actually attack schools on safety measures in the name of parental rights. They have here that they want to remove unnecessary red tape by allowing teenagers to decide with their parents to get a job without needing school permissions. In fact, they go so far as to criticize in Ohio how teenagers must provide a physician's certificate asserting that they're physically fit to be employed. Because apparently, if you're, unable to work because you're not physically fit to work at a young age, then, that should be an issue that is up to the parents, not in any way regulated based on a physician's need, especially in a system where we might see parents need to send their kids off to school, to work rather, and not to school because they are in poverty. So, getting to that and elaborating further on that, the parents who are going to send these kids to jobs are likely those who are in the most financial hardship. It's not going to be a choice for a lot of people to send their kids if they are financially secure. It's going to be people who are in financial hardship and who are in situations where they are forced to send their kid in order to survive. That's just the reality of things. Now, with this particular organization, something that they hope to make worse is this exact situation, because they want to slash social safety nets since, according to them, expanded welfare programs, including food stamps, are causing people not to work for low wages. Now, we actually can look here. They're talking about child tax credits and getting rid of them. Food stamps. They want to get rid of Obamacare subsidies. They want to get rid of other government programs because welfare, according to them, is now better than work for millions of Americans. So instead of having companies raise wages, they want to cut all these safety nets so that people are forced to work at poverty rates that can barely pay for rent, food, and medicine. Now, incidentally, the exact same organization, has backed bills like the one in Iowa, in which they are attacking food stamps. The one that is going to effectively make it so that many people cannot get access to food, and that is going to put a strain on food banks in the state of Iowa. Of course, Iowa being the exact state where they're expanding these child labor laws to include 14-year-olds in much more dangerous jobs. Now, this will create a situation, of course, where families will be even more desperate to work any job, and even send their teenagers to work for survival instead of allowing them to get an education. You're essentially going to see situations like these companies want and like this particular organization wants, where parents are going to have to try to advocate for their child to work in order for them to survive. They are literally putting families in the worst place possible. So, to put this all succinctly, so we all understand exactly what's going on, this organization is trying to put people in desperate financial situations by removing social safety nets. They are attacking schools and other institutions that protect children from working, remove accountability and documentation for children who do work, and increasing the amount of children working to feed their desperate families, as well as increase the exploitation that migrant workers will experience. And all of this is being done in the name of making more profit for businesses that do not wish to pay workers a living wage in these economic realities. The fact is that this is what an economic system that looks at bottom lines over people does. It tries to prioritize the financial gain of businesses instead of the needs of people. These are the type of things that have been fought against by leftists before. We need to keep fighting against this, time and time again, to rid ourselves of these vile practices like child labor, and eventually reach a point where this is no longer something that we'd even remotely consider talking about. We need to keep expanding our movements. Unless we do that, we're going to keep coming back to these places. We're going to keep seeing companies try to push the envelope, because unfortunately, this is not something new. Since at least the 1980s, a lot of companies and a lot of organizations have been trying to advocate for removing these child labor laws since unions lost a lot of their power in the country. And the only thing that's ever stood up to this is strong leftist movements and strong union organization. So with that said, if you've learned something here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as consider joining my Discord where we talk about conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube, and it goes a long way to helping me produce more of these type of videos. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below, and with that said, my name is Anarchist Terra. Thank you so much for watching.